Lorna, it is now 9:30. Should we begin the hearing?
Yes, we can. I've received no requests to speak at this point. So I think we're good to start.
Good morning, everyone. Let's call to order this public hearing. But before we begin, I will ask our counsel to review the regulations allowing for electronic meetings. Counsel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to give you a slightly longer explanation of the procedures this morning since we're holding a public hearing. As you all know, the board is holding your meeting this morning for the purpose of holding a public hearing on both the proposed budget and the proposed rate increase. Typically, of course, we would be holding this public hearing in person at the headquarters of Alexandria Renew, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are conducting this in the form of an electronic meeting. One of the things that we've done to try to accommodate people who are not comfortable, particularly because many have not received vaccinations, is to provide alternative means of connecting with the board. My understanding through the Zoom platform is that any member of the public can either connect through a computer or call in through a telephone. We've also in our public notice indicated that written comments will be received and considered by the board today and certainly up to the date of your decision on June 15th. So we're trying our best, given the circumstances, to provide as many mechanisms for any member of the public to provide their comments on both the budget and the rates in advance of the board's decision. So that's a little bit of the explanation. I also want to remind you that the public hearing on the rates is required by the state code. However, there is no legal requirement for a public hearing on the budget. The tradition at Alexandria Renew is to hold a hearing and take comment on the budget each year. And this also helps provide information for consideration of the rates. So that's why we're having a hearing on both the budget and the proposed rates. The statutes require that I read out loud the specific reasons for the electronic meeting and the justifications. So I'm going to proceed to do that right now. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic emergency, the May 22nd, 2021 Alexandria Renew Enterprises Board of Directors public hearing is being held electronically pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2, 3708.2A3, the Continuity of Government Ordinance adopted by the City Council on June 20, 2020, and or Section 4.0.00G in House Bill 29 and House Bill 30 from last year's General Assembly budget session to undertake essential business. And as I mentioned, the board of directors and the staff are participating from remote locations through a video conference call on Zoom. This hearing is being recorded and the recording will be posted on the Alexandria Renew website. And as I said, not only are there opportunities for the public to convey their comments electronically, but we're also taking written comments through the decision on June 15th. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Now let me restate that the purpose of this hearing is for the board to consider and gather information related to the Alex Renew budget for fiscal 2022 and the 2022-23 proposed rate adjustments. And before we receive public input, I would like the CEO, Ms. Palanch, to present on the budget and the proposed rate adjustments. Madam CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, board members. staff was going to provide to you an overview of the draft rates and budget. I just want to remind you that the process for the budget started back in January, as is our norm. And we've presented several times at public board meetings. We've also had a Finance and Audit Committee meeting in which we discussed the budget, and that was also open to the public. The process for the rates took a little bit longer, or has been in the works, I should say, a lot longer, since we took ownership of the city's 4 combined sewer outfalls and the program called River Renew, which is going to remediate those outfalls to meet the 2017 legislation that requires us to have those remediated by 2025. That program was not previously funded in our capital program, thus requiring a series of significant rate increases in order to pay for the long-term debt issuances that need to be in place to make the $615 million project a go and to complete the requirements around the legislation for us. And so we have been in process looking at how we can adapt and fund this project going on. And so again, since February, we've talked to you about the various form that the rates need to take in order to make sure that we get this project done and Alex Renew stays fiscally solvent. With that, I'm going to turn over the presentation piece of this to Alex Renew's Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Christine McIntyre. She's going to walk you through the briefing, and then we will, as the reminder, and then we will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair, to run the public hearing.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Karen, for that introduction. As you mentioned, we're here to talk about both the budget for the upcoming year and the rate adjustments for the next 2 years. But would like to start by sharing some background information that's important when trying to understand Alex Renew's budget and rates. Starting with just how water works in the city of Alexandria. So if you live in the city, there are several distinct entities that provide different forms of water service to the community. So when you turn on your tap in your home or business, the drinking water that comes out is provided by Virginia American Water, a private company. That water leaves your home or business in pipes that are owned by the city of Alexandria, and then eventually to larger pipes that bring it to Alex Renew's facility, where it is cleaned through a treatment process before being discharged back into our local waterways. The city of Alexandria also provides stormwater services to manage the impacts of rainfall on the environment. So if you're a city resident, you may receive one bill from Virginia American Water for drinking water, one bill from Alex Renew for sewer services, a portion of which we remit back to the city to help fund the maintenance of the collection system, and then a separate stormwater fee that is on the real estate tax bill through the city. So we are the wastewater authority, and Alex Renew was created in the 50s as the federal government was beginning to pass legislation to address water pollution. And cities like Alexandria endeavored to build wastewater treatment plants like ours that you see here pictured on the slide. Alex Renew is a political subdivision of the Commonwealth of Virginia, so that makes us a public entity. So while we are fiscally and administratively a distinct enterprise, we are bound by public rules similar to a municipality or a state. We're led by a 5-member board of directors, and these board members volunteer their time to serve and are appointed by the Alexandria City Council through an application process. Our board members include Board Chair John Hill, Vice Chair Jim Beal, Secretary William Dickinson, and members Bruce Johnson and Adriana Caldarelli. Alex Renew serves more than 300,000 customers in the city of Alexandria, as well as providing wholesale service to a significant portion of Fairfax County. So here is the service area depicted visually, and the green area is where Alex Renew provides sewer service, and the city borders are outlined in purple. So within those city limits, Alex Renew bills customers individually for sewer service, and then the areas outside of that city are where we serve Fairfax County on a wholesale basis. And the dark blue lines represent the interceptor sewers and pump stations that Alex Renew owns that help bring the water into our facility to be cleaned before it's discharged. Our facility is down here by this yellow dot just outside of Old Town, not too far from the river. And as Karen alluded to, Alex Renew is in the first couple of years of a major capital program called River Renew. And the red dots you see are new assets that Alex Renew will be constructing, primarily a tunnel system to remediate that combined sewer issue. And just one other note on this slide, there is a small portion of the city here where you see this kind of cutout that the sewer flows go to the Arlington plant. So Alex Renew also makes payment to Arlington County to serve that portion of the city. This is a slightly closer up look at the major assets in the Alex Renew system. And when you combine those interceptors and pump stations with the pretty significant treatment facility we have on our primary campus, it totals almost $1 billion. So that's really important to keep in mind as we talk about the budget and rates, because $1 billion worth of assets is something you have to take care of, and it does take money to make sure those assets stay in good working condition over time. Alex Renew also has several service agreements with local jurisdictions that impact its budget. The first is with the city, and as I've mentioned, we charge city customers through our sewer bill, and that's the primary topic in terms of rates when we get to that later in the presentation. And then, as mentioned, we provide service to Fairfax County, so Fairfax County reimburses us for providing those services. In the case of the day-to-day kind of annual operating expenses to operate the facility, Fairfax contributes based on the percentage of flow that they send to the Alex Renew plant, while the capital costs are shared either based on the service agreement, or in some case there are project-specific agreements or memorandums of understanding, such as the cost share agreement that governs what Alex Renew pays and what Fairfax County pays for the River Renew program. So as Karen mentioned, Alex Renew's mission expanded significantly in 2018 when the 4 combined sewer outfalls were transferred to Alex Renew. It was the year prior that the law was passed by the Commonwealth requiring the city to address the 4 combined sewer outfalls that are in the older part of the city, and to do so on a pretty accelerated, about 7-year timeline. So the city worked with Alex Renew and a broad group of stakeholders to develop a solution to comply with the legislation. And in 2018, the city transferred ownership, and Alex Renew is now funding and running the program that we call River Renew to remediate the combined sewer system. At a high level, the River Renew program primarily involves constructing a tunnel underground that will bring that combined sewage and rainwater flow back to the plant, where we can treat it before it's discharged and prevent it from discharging into the river untreated as it is today when it rains. In addition to the tunnel, there's several ongoing projects that are part of the River Renew portfolio. One of the largest is what we call the Building J project, involved the demolition of our former administrative building, and that was needed to make way for the tunnel shaft to put the machine in the ground that will dig the tunnel. So those projects are wrapping up, and the tunnel contract was awarded in December, and they're mobilizing and about to be under major construction. And as Karen mentioned, the price tag on the program is expected to be $615 million. That money is being spent over a pretty short period of time. And so that is really one of the major drivers of our budget and rates. So moving along to talk about the budget, there are several principles that sort of guide Alex Renew's work in this area. Obviously, we want to be able to operate a fiscally stable and fiscally sustainable utilities so that the services we provide to our customers are uninterrupted and can respond to the demands of the future. We also endeavor to set customer rates so that they fully recover the cost of service. And we work with a team of rate consultants that help us model this. So we forecast our needs and then make sure that our rates are going to be sufficient to meet those needs, and also certain other boundaries, such as our loan documents and financial policies. In terms of our financial policies, we have three major financial policies. The first is a requirement to maintain what they call 1.5 times minimum debt service coverage. Basically, what that means is however much revenue we bring in, less what it costs to run the facility, we need to have enough left over at the end of each year to cover the annual payments on our debt by at least 1.5 times. It's basically a metric that's designed to ensure that we don't take on too much debt. Next, we have a minimum cash reserve requirement of 120 days of operating expenses, and our financial policy requires us to have that on hand in the bank at all times, just to make sure that we have enough cash to get through any potential disruptive periods. And lastly, while much of our construction work is funded through debt, we do commit to fund at least 15% of the capital program from cash flow and reserves. In the financial industry, they call this PAYGO. And again, this is just a guardrail to make sure that we don't rely too heavily on debt. In terms of major drivers of the fiscal 22 budget, it's kind of two different stories in the two major parts of the budget. The first major part of the budget is the operating budget, the day-to-day annual expenses. And that budget is being held steady for a second year in a row, while on the capital side, we're beginning to see that peak. So as it relates to the operating budget, the cost of treating wastewater does increase over time, particularly in areas like the chemicals that we use in the treatment process and the utilities needed to keep the plant running. Those things do tend to increase, sometimes at a higher rate than inflation, but fortunately we've been able to balance the increases we face in those areas with efficiencies in other areas. So that was really our attempt to do everything we could to pull back spending in acknowledgement of the fact that the community is still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. As it relates to the capital program, there's just no way to hold that down with River Renew in the mix, and you're going to see both a significant increase in the capital spending as well as a correspondingly large increase in the use of debt proceeds to fund that capital work. So here is kind of the big picture summary comparison of this year's budget versus last year's budget. Again, if you look at it big picture, the budget is almost doubling. But if you look at the individual components, it's really that capital expense that's increasing from 63 million last year, all the way up to 179 million next year. And then the use of debt proceeds increasing almost 100 million to fund that capital work. And I do want to note that in terms of the capital expenditure, the River Renew program is the primary driver, but Alex Renew does have a portfolio of general capital work outside of the River Renew program, and always will, because that's just the nature of the utility business, needing to reinvest and build new assets to handle new needs. Here is more of a visual depiction of the various funding sources in the revenues in the budget. And so in the light blue, you see that about 21% is coming from our retail rates that we charge to city customers. There's a meaningful portion that comes from Fairfax County. And then again, that large blue area is the debt funding that we are forecasting we will need to access in the coming budget year in order to fund the construction of the tunnel system. And here is a visual depiction of the expense side of the budget. So all those kind of smaller slices in the top right-hand corner, those are the operating expenses and payment of debt service, so principal and interest on debt that we already have. And then the two blue larger slices represent the River Renew spending for the coming year. And here we've broken it down between the portion that Alex Renew will fund on its own because it benefits the city only, and the portion that is considered joint use with Fairfax County that is subject to that cost share agreement. And just some other major themes in this year's budget as it relates to debt. You know, I've mentioned several times now that the debt use is going to be increasing, but the good news is that in early 2021, we were able to lock in the interest rates on two significant loans to help fund the River Renew program. So we issued about $321 million through the federal WIFIA program that stands for Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. It's a somewhat newer federal program that allows utilities to access subsidized and very flexible capital for water projects. And then we also issued a $185 million loan through the state Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund and just got excellent interest rates on both of those, 1.88% on WIFIA and 1.35% on clean water. And in combination with the state grant funding that has both been received and is expected to be received, that Alex Renew has worked in conjunction with the city on. All of these very efficient funding mechanisms are really going to help minimize the rate increases that are needed to fund River Renew. And in terms of capital expenditures, it's important to understand that while we approve the budget kind of 1 year at a time, as it relates to the capital work, we're always looking out over a much longer time frame. So this lays out the total spend for the full 10-year period from now forward 10 years, and that's a $721 million forecast for, again, largely River Renew, but also a meaningful portfolio of projects outside of River Renew. And, again, we've mentioned several times that there's new debt coming on, and this shows the forecast for how Alex Renew could repay the debt associated with River Renew. So this light blue is existing debt. The orange is the clean water debt, and then the WIFIA debt is in dark blue. And what we've done here is worked with our financial advisors in both of these lending agencies to come up with a plan of financing that would allow for us to increase our rates gradually. So you can see that the debt service payments kind of move up from year to year until the project is complete. And you'll see that same pattern in the rates when we get to that portion. So moving on to the rates, Alex Renew is proposing a rate adjustment for each of the next 2 fiscal years. So the proposal is an increase of 6.9% to become effective this July for fiscal 22, and then an additional increase of 6.5% effective the following July for the following fiscal year. And there are a number of reasons why staff has recommended a 2-year rate adjustment. It's really just the most efficient use of both staff and consultant time to work on the rate forecast. These next 2 fiscal years are the peak spending years for the largest projects. So it's important that we have a level of certainty around funding the capital budget. And it does still allow for flexibility to adjust if things look different a year from now. So for example, during the current budget year, Alex Renew's board elected to reduce what had previously been planned as an 11% rate increase to 6%, because revenues were strong enough to allow for that, and because we recognized that the community was in the depths of the pandemic. So, you know, we can always go back next year and make it lower, but it's nice to go ahead and adopt rates for that 2-year period to provide that certainty. And when we talk about Alex Renew rates, we typically like to talk about it in terms of what it means to your average residential single-family customer. And in this case, each of these rate increases is equivalent to approximately $3 a month. So whatever that single-family customer is paying today, the proposal here is for that to go up by $3 a month next year, and then an additional $3 a month the year following. And this graphic puts the rate increases into a bit more of a historical context. So showing Alex Renew's rates starting in 2019, before any rate increases associated with River Renew had begun. We did already implement rate increases in fiscal 20 and 21. You can see here in the middle, the two that are being proposed for adoption this year, and then some future projections going out to 2026. So again, you'll notice this nice smooth pattern where rate increases are being planned and phased in very gradually, so that customers can also plan and don't have sticker shock by a very sudden rate increase. And again, just tracking back to that single family home example, the current cost for that type of customer based on 4,000 gallons of consumption, which is what is sort of average for our customer base, is right around $53 at present. And the proposal is to go up to $56 next year and $59 the year following. And these numbers do include the portion of the fee that we remit back to the city. So that's just important to keep in mind, that both pieces are included here. Now, one piece of really good news is that the rate increases, while significant, are much lower actually than what was projected at the outset of the program. So back in April 2018, when River Renew was gearing up, the expectation was that that average residential customer might see an increase of between $20 and $40 a month when all was said and done. And now that we have more certainty around the cost of the project, as well as those locked in interest rates, so we know what the cost of capital is for the program, the projection is now that we will be at the very, very low end of that range, which is really nice to see. And if you're a math nerd and want to run the numbers and see what your bill would be, this is how we actually calculate the bills. So Alex Renew charges both a base charge that is a fixed monthly charge, as well as a flow charge that's based on the number of thousands of gallons you use per month. So in the case of a residential customer, the base charge is fixed. In the case of a commercial customer, it's tiered based on the meter size. But these are sort of the numbers that behind the scenes are used to come up with these estimates in terms of what the Alex Renew monthly bill would be. And here we show those numbers, this time without the city charge. So if you peel that away, our component of the bill is currently at $44, moving up to $47 in fiscal 22 and $50 in 2023. So here we've tried to take a look at the total cost of what we call One Water in Alexandria. So that's how we refer to this full complement of different organizations that collaborate to provide water services to the city. And when you combine all of those pieces together, the monthly cost is around $87 and the annual cost is just over $1,000. And to give that even more context, shown here is a summary based on 2019 census data of what it costs to live in Alexandria. So this is a summary of just all the different components of what are considered basic living costs: housing, taxes, transportation. And I think this just helps put that one water cost into perspective. It's just around 1% of that total basic living cost. And so it's just important to understand that as the cost of various water services do increase in the area, that is really just one small part of the overall affordability in the area. Another question that we get quite often from the public as it relates to our rates is how they compare to others' rates. And there's two basic ways you can look at that. You can compare Alex Renew's rates to other similar entities in the region, or you can look at a broader geographic area and look for utilities that have similar characteristics as Alex Renew. And one such characteristic are communities that are facing these high dollar combined sewer projects, or CSO communities as they're called in the business. And so here we compare our rates to local peers such as Arlington, WSSC, Fairfax, and ours are a little bit higher than some of those local jurisdictions, but it's important to keep in mind that on this local list, Alex Renew and DC Water are the only two entities that are facing these expensive CSO projects. Now, when you broaden the geographic territory and compare our rates to other CSO communities, the story is a bit different. So here we've collected places all over the country that are facing similar challenges. Those CSO communities in Virginia are down at the bottom. So in addition to the two in our direct area, we also have Richmond and Lynchburg that are facing similar challenges. And so you can see here that our rates are really somewhat average in comparison to this group. And I'll finish up today by just, Karen addressed this. It's funny in the budget world, as soon as you adopt one budget, you pretty much start working on the next year's budget. So staff has been working on the budget all the way back to last maybe November, December. And then as Karen mentioned, there's a long period of time where the budget is reviewed by the board and available for the public to review as well. And then of course we have the public hearing here today. And on June 15th is when the adoption of the budget and rate proposals are scheduled, and new rates and new budget year would begin on July 1st. And as always, we've used a variety of communication channels to try to make the community aware of the rate adjustments, certainly online materials, social media. I know a number of local publications have picked up that story. We also use more traditional methods, such as putting physical bill stuffers in our paper bills, and certainly participating in lots of different community meetings so that those in the city are aware of Alex Renew's plans and have time to plan accordingly, and also so that the community understands the value of the services that Alex Renew provides with this rate revenue. And with that, I will turn it back over to Karen.
Thank you, Christine, for that overview. Mr. Hill, it's back to you to open the public hearing.
Thank you, Karen and Christine, for such a thoughtful and informative presentation. Now, let me ask our secretary to the board, Lorna Huff, have any written comments been received from the public?
We have received no written comments. If we have members of the public in attendance who'd like to speak, we ask them to use the raised hand feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we'll ask them to unmute, and they will be allotted 3 minutes to respond.
Lorna, let's wait a minute and see
Okay,
if anybody responds.
Lorna, I just also wanted to ask for the record, are there any participants who have called in by telephone?
No, we've no
Thank
phone calls.
Thank you.
Lorna, can we conclude that no one wishes to speak today at the public hearing?
I think that's a good conclusion. We have 5 attendees, and I think we're okay in that regard.
Very good. Let me thank the board for attending the meeting, and especially thank our CEO and her staff for a very thoughtful presentation. And would also like to thank the members of the public who are attending. Thank them for their interest in this topic. It's a very important topic to Alexandria. And remind everyone that we will vote on the budget and the proposed rates at our meeting on June 15th at 6 o'clock. If there are no comments from the board, I will entertain a motion to adjourn this public hearing.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn from Mr. Johnson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Beal. All in favor, say aye. Again, thank you and enjoy a very pleasant Saturday. Thanks, everybody.
I see Karen.